My name is Reed Schlegel, I'm an industrial designer, and today we're going to talk about a few things you can do to take your design sketching process up a level to make it faster, cleaner, and sexier. So once you've mastered perspective, you can start getting more of the details in a sketch. One thing that I think really helps you make your sketch bump up a level very quickly is by varying your line weight. To do this, I really think there's a few quick tips that you can think and rely on to make your work consistent and make a lot of sense. So I'm going to quickly draw a cube in perspective, like we learned in our previous video. And we're going to talk about how you can judge where to put thin versus thick lines. So if two faces come together and you can see the edge they make, like this one or this one, this line stays thin. However, if you have a face where you can't see the back that makes this edge, like that one or this one, the line gets thick. The rationale behind this is that these are gravity lines. These are things that are weighing the object down in space and allows it to have a varying line weight so it doesn't look like a bunch of skinny lines on a page, and it actually makes it pop off a little bit more. So to do this, I'll usually take a thicker pen and actually go around the outside, drawing my lines a little bit more deliberately than going all the way through, but still it can be messy if you want, and making a nice thick border. So now this makes the object come off of the page a lot more than it did just with thin lines. But this is very easy for a cube. When you have objects that have more intricate details, like big curves or cutouts or holes, you want to think about how you actually make these lines terminate. So let's say we have an object that has a big flat back, a shelf, but then curls down and meets the rest of the object. So this one's more or less in perspective, but the thing we're trying to look at now is how do you tell what happens here? Because up here, you cannot see the other side, but here, you can see the other side. So for this one, I'll take my thicker pen and I'll do the easy lines, which are basically all of the exterior edges. Putting a nice thick line on it, and it's going edge to edge. If you make a few mistakes, it's okay. But for this part, what I would usually do is start off thick and try and taper it down and end with a dot. Just by having a line that ends with a dot, it implies that it's tapering off and that the line is actually going from an edge where you can't see the other side to one that you can see the other side. So this is a very hard edge, but it also works for places that are a little more smooth and different types of surface transitions. So keeping this basic rule in mind will allow you to have your sketches have more varied line weight and pop off of the page. But something else to consider when you're actually drawing is that no object is ever perfectly square. And what do I mean by that? No object has a corner that is going to come to a complete sharp edge. So most people think objects look like this. But in reality, most objects probably have a very small corner or a radius on its edge. Because of this, you're going to have shadows and light get picked up by the actual environment. So when you're drawing something, you actually want to have this be represented in the bottom of your sketch. So if I'm going to do another cube, I'm going to quickly draw in perspective, not being too concerned with how extreme it is. I'm going to go around the edges and follow the rules we just discussed. But the bottom, I'm going to go and make it extra double thick. The reason I do this is because when you have a shape that goes straight to a corner and then meets the ground, it's going to pick up some shadow under here, and it's going to make your shadow a little bit thicker. What this also does for you is it kind of grounds your object in space. Since there's an implied shadow underneath your object, it makes it feel like it's actually sitting on the page. This is all great for the exterior of your actual objects and the surface transitions, but I want to talk to you about actually showing this curve on faces that aren't touching the ground. So what I would do after this is I would go in and think about what is happening at these other curves. So since there is a curve here, which we're showing the thicker gravity line, there's also going to be curves on all of these edges. So to make this look real, what I would do is go in and add a very thin line next to the ones we already have and add a little bit of a curve just to imply that these things are actually meeting at the actual chamfer transition. And also thinking about foreshortening and having the ones on the opposing faces be very tight to the edge. Also notice I'm churning my page as I go to make it be as quick and easy for me as possible. But now, when I actually go, I have a cube which has so much more information about it. It says it's a cube, it's sitting on the ground, and all of its edges have a mild chamfer. So this takes your sketch from being a very simple line drawing to one that has a lot more detail, much more personality, and is much more dynamic. So this is something I really recommend for people when they're a little bit further along in their sketches and they want something that communicates an idea a little bit more than, say, a post-it note sketch or a really quick ideation sketch. But the last thing I want to talk about is actually contour lines. Contour lines are a great way in which you can take an object and give it more meaning. Everything I've drawn so far has been implied that it's basically a perfect cube. But if you put a contour line, you can really change that surfacing. So something you should know before you even get into contour lines is how to break an object up. If you have a square or a rectangle, to perfectly break an object in half, all you have to do is draw a line from corner to corner, and then in perspective, draw a line up, which perfectly splits the object. Now this object, if I want to get it into thirds, I would do the same thing, but add one more step. I would connect the corners, and then from the center point, go back to the corners, and then from this intersection point, put a line up, which roughly says 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Now, once you know the way to split an object, you can split the object with contour lines to actually give it new meaning and new surfacing. So going back to our last sketch, if I take this and I split it down the middle with a contour line, I can perfectly show where this object splits in half. And once I know this, I can use curved lines to give more information. So right now, this implies that the top of my object is flat. But if I go here and I actually curve it in, I can start giving this object a very different profile just by adding a line that goes down the center, makes this look like this is concave and this is convex. So by using contour lines, you can add one more layer of line weight to your actual work, give it a lot more meaning, and really make it easy for somebody to understand what it is that you're trying to communicate. But the last thing I want to say is what pens you should use to get your line weight. In this demo, I have used two so far. My thick lines, I use a Sharpie. For my medium line weight, I use a Pentel Flare. But for my thin lines, which I would use further down the process when I'm really trying to get a lot of detail in, I use Pentel Hybrid Technicas. I really prefer the 03 because there's a line of them, and this is the one that's just thin enough that doesn't tear your page, but it also makes a nice, clean, smooth line. So to show you what these do, a Hybrid Technica gives you a nice, clean, thin line. A Pentel Flare, which is a felt tip pen, gives you a nice medium line weight. And then the Sharpie gives you a nice, thick line weight. By using these three different weights, you can really take a sketch and make it dynamic and pull it to whatever fidelity you want. And these are all super cheap. You can get them anywhere. If you lose them, you're not gonna be upset. And I always carry these around.